I feel like I put on like the sexy podcast voice when it's time to
Listen,
record.
you're making me think I should be speaking more. Yeah.
It's like a running joke, I think, on like social media where like somebody comes on, they're like, welcome to the show.
Hello and welcome. Or I have like a mini mic and I'm like, so what I was going to say.
Welcome back to Demystifying Cosmetics, the show where we pull back the curtain on what's in your beauty products and why it matters. Today, we're getting into something that almost every product has, but very few consumers fully understand: fragrance. It's the invisible emotional signature of a product and also one of the most tightly guarded parts of the formula. To help us break down what's in a scent and what's being left out, we're joined by Ashlee Posner, co-founder of Lucent Labs, a formulation and fragrance development studio that's helping brands balance creativity with compliance and transparency. Ashlee brings a rare blend of olfactory expertise, regulatory insight, and real-world product experience. And today she's here to help us decode its complexities of cosmetic fragrance. Hello, welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
I feel like I put on like the sexy podcast voice when it's time to record.
Listen, you're making me think I should be speaking more. Yeah.
It's like a running joke, I think, on like social media where like somebody comes on, they're like, welcome to the show.
Hello and welcome. Or I have like a mini mic and I'm like, so what I was going to say.
Yes, that is what I don't want to turn into. So
I have one somewhere. It's never been used.
So welcome. I did a brief intro, but I'd love for you to kind of give us your like quick, about you and how you ended up in fragrance.
Yeah, so I have a background in chemical engineering. I spent a year just outside of Grasse after doing my MBA, and always was a lover of perfume. I started my first business with actually my sister-in-law now. Wasn't at the time, very risky.
Yes.
Had a profile of my personality. And kind of like learned so much, maybe too much, I think is probably the where it led, about the fragrance industry, about the supply chain, about operations, and just about entrepreneurship, honestly. And the short, long version is that business went on to teach me way too much. And after I had my first child and became much more conscious of ingredients, which is about 5 years ago, I took a deep dive into some of our formulations, and down the rabbit hole I went, and found out very quickly that there was just the supply chain is broken, super antiquated space. All the players were super antiquated in their processes, in their safety profile, just everything. There was a lot of information. It's very veiled. And I spiraled down the rabbit hole to see if you could build a better product in fine fragrance, which is how everything started. And I launched the brand. It's called State of Change, which is a solid format fragrance. That's how this whole, and everything was completely transparent. So we listed all the fragrance ingredients. I could have never imagined how much inbound came at me from just doing that.
Yeah, and cool.
What blew me away was like, clearly we had poked at something. And within 6 months, we had turned to focus on supporting other brands, and Lucent Labs was built. And we service brands building safer, healthier products. We build their fragrance formulation across all of CPG, anything scented. We've really hit every category by now, every retailer that you can imagine. And we really build with a partnership in mind. So we try to front end all the questions. We lead with transparency and validation as the core of everything that we do, and are really mission-based to push this piece, this small puzzle piece that exists in a much larger part of the beauty space, forward from a sense of transparency, validation, and innovation. And I know you and I have talked a lot about all the topics that fit into that. That's kind of the short and long of what we do and what led me to here.
Awesome. So, going into that idea of, transparency and safety, how are fragrance formulas treated differently from other cosmetic ingredients when it comes to disclosure?
So there is no disclosure, there's no transparency at all on the fragrance piece. So that's where I started from the beginning. I was using these formulations, putting them on people, all of this. And if you go deep into it, that word fragrance that is on a label can represent anywhere from 50 to 300 ingredients that are not disclosed. That's not just not disclosed to the customer. That's not disclosed to the brand, to the chemists working on the project. That is not disclosed and does not leave the fragrance house that does the formulation. So there really is no accountability in the space. And that just blew me away in today's world. I mean, fast forward from when we started, now in the world of like data and AI, you're just like, this doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
And it really, the word fragrance falls under trade secrets. And that's why that is. It's a super antiquated space. And it makes logical sense of maybe why it existed 100 years ago. In today's world, it's not what consumers want. It's not really what brands want. We see all these third-party certifications and ways to vet things. And somehow still 99% of brands that are on the market have no visibility into this last piece.
Yeah. And I guess, why is that, right? When we talk about the ability to either reverse engineer or translate, I can kind of understand in terms of like not listing, the ingredients as a trade secret. But for instance, with ingredients that are mixtures, right? Normally the manufacturer or distributor will list the individual components in a range, right? So to protect that ability to either reverse engineer or just, recreate it. How does the fragrance industry, try to, or why do you think that they operate in a very different way, even in not disclosing what those 300 ingredients are, because you don't know what level they're in at, you don't know the grade, the purity, any of that. So it becomes very difficult to reverse engineer to even, recreate these things.
You don't know how many, and you don't know what, right? And so where does it live? It's a very interesting supply chain. It's a oligopoly. 4 to 6 very large businesses own it. If you are those businesses, do you ever want this to change? No, you have a great business. You build these formulas. No one knows anything. You actually have minimal regulation or accountability behind the scenes. You can kind of do whatever you want, with a little bit of reason. IFRA is a self-regulated body, right? That you lock in a customer, you put it into market, you never have to really validate anything or show them anything. You own that customer, right? So if you're those businesses, it makes sense. Does it line up with the last 10, 12 years of what we've seen in, I don't like to use this term, but clean beauty, right? Like with everything else, not at all. So why does it exist? It's just an antiquated space where the people that own it get to dictate how it's happened, right? And again, conceptually, did that make sense 100 years ago? Yeah. Does it make sense now? Not at all. And even the visibility of the pain that we have heard from customers that have come over to us of just trying to, the 3-way NDAs that are involved, that they should be left out of the space to just validate if something meets a certain standard. You want to go get EWG verified. They cannot get that information. The years and the, emails and trying to get that validation is utterly impossible. And part of that is just what happens over time in an archaic business or supply chain, right? That is just the nature of, and those are the best places for disruption, right? Like, there's so much opportunity to make it better. What I thought was really interesting for me, and when we launched State of Change, that really blew me away, was that people wanted to know the list of ingredients. I was not out there saying this is 100% natural. If anything, we were using many safe synthetic materials. Sure. And that's where I kind of realized there was a much larger opportunity, because the amount of work that the majority of brands that come out today have put a lot of work into their R&D. And whether you're a shampoo, whether you're a laundry detergent, you're trying to make a better product. You usually have put a lot of work into using better ingredients, and then you are forced between a rock and a hard place. So your option is fragrance free, right?
Yeah, that's my default. Yep.
Listen, I will openly, this is not an ad for this company, but I will openly say that in my home where my children are, we use a brand called the Unscented Company, and that is intentional.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is a choice. I personally don't think that should have to exist. I think that is a Band-Aid, and I think that somebody needed to create a better solution.
Yeah.
And that's what we've done with Lucent Labs. We've said there is a better way to do this. There is information, there is partnership, and we realize that people do want to know, but they need more information. And this specific space has not been sharing that information.
Yeah. And I guess to that point, how do you navigate it then, right? When traditionally brands have not had access to this information, how are you getting this information and or operating in what seems like relatively a monopoly, right? Not only do these large fragrance houses own, most of the business as well as the formulations, but they also own the inputs to those formulations, right? They are the major players in terms of sourcing any of those ingredients as well as providing them to others. How have you navigated getting information and, securing, let's say, any of these ingredient components that, you can have that transparency from either, cradle to grave or whatever insight you've been able to gain in that manufacturing process?
So I will tell you, the one thing that we did from the beginning is different from the history of a lot of those businesses. This was started as a woman and a mom who thought it is absurd that I have to use pretty much 99% of products that are on the market that are fragrance have no validation to call them safe, right? So within what is legally allowed to be used of raw materials, there are endocrine disruptors, there are carcinogens, there are reprotoxins, right? Across the board. And so our approach from the beginning, and this was from my learnings when launching the brand, was really like, I don't need everyone else's information. I need to build this, what actually makes sense for us from a safety profile. And that's really how we started. And we really built with intention from a standpoint of both local and systemic toxicity, from data that exists publicly.
I was just going to say, using like existing data sources that have information.
I get that as an end consumer or even as a brand owner, that you do not want to be responsible for that deep dive, but you do want to have a partner who feels the same as you do on what the product should do, how it should do it, and what your thesis is from a raw material standpoint. So like literally the first thing that we do is we ask way too many questions up front, which is kind of the opposite of what this space looks like, right?
Sure.
I'm not taking the art away from building a beautiful fragrance. I'm just putting a filter over it that relates to everything else that is important to consumers today. And that is safety and transparency and validation and science.
Yeah. It's funny. I recently spoke to a gentleman that is trying to make LCAs more approachable, the life cycle analysis, right? To really have, clear inputs and understanding, the impact of your product and how to make decisions. And it's very similar, right? You are trying to set these system boundaries to say, like, these are the elements that we're going to look at, and this is how far it's going to reach in order to come to a conclusion. And you're being able to, provide that data to brands to say, this isn't good or bad. This is just where this is, right? Where do you want to be?
and I say that all the time in the same respect, like, it's not my job to decide whether your brand is a good idea, whether and I say it to our team because sometimes, brands come in and they have opinions and like, that's so great. Like, you can have an opinion on whatever you want. But the truth is what we're trying to do is democratize this piece so that people can build what they want and what their customer wants, right?
Sure.
Your job is to know your customer, know what they want, what's important to them. Our job is to give you something that meets a much higher standard of safety that exists and allows you to say, you know, natural ingredients are really important. We want to live here. It's also my job to give you the information and say, there's also this nature identical that might actually lower your cost, or, right, like give you the information in a transparent, clear way so you can make the best decision. We do not make any of the decisions for our customers. We just say we want to outline all the options that exist.
Yeah. And, you know, going into, I think the space of the naturals and this, you know, idea of greenwashing that is merged with the clean beauty. And I like that you and I both, like, I will never be able to say clean beauty without clean beauty.
Also, like, I want to be really honest. I hope that everybody making products today, like, I love when people are like, clean is table stakes. And I'm just like, are there people who are like, I'm going to make a product and it's not safe? Like, it just, in the world we live in, it feels so absurd that we're
still using quotes around it. I think it's because of, you know, the broad definition of what and how emotional the definition has become versus, you know, a factual kind of infrastructure, but we're trying. But I think, you know, you're touching upon a little bit of this natural. I recently had worked with a client who was putting together a fragrance, and, you know, in their mind, they're like, well, everything's natural. It's grapefruit oil. Right? And I was like, well, in this grapefruit oil is a carcinogen, you know, or an endocrine disruptor. And so, you know, how do you navigate that conversation? You know, because again, you mentioned, you know, very safe synthetic. And a lot of times if you're looking at certain metrics in regards to sustainability, even, right, when it comes to land use, water use, carbon, whatever your metric is, sometimes those natural ingredients are not as good, and even in the safety profile. So, and you see it, I've seen it quite a bit, right? Where it's like, oh, we use natural fragrances or natural flavors. And I'm like,
so here is the t-shirt. Here's the t-shirt that I literally have a note because we're starting to make merch. Okay.
I got to have a merch area on the podcast website.
Natural, and then the does not equal sign, and safe. And I am not saying anything bad about natural ingredients. I'm not saying don't use them. Just saying, and it's not like, I don't think it's as bad in the rest of formulation. But if you drill down to what happened and just kind of what the industry looks like of natural versus synthetic in fragrance specifically, what happened is if you want to be able to disclose or have visibility, you had to use natural essential oils. And that was the kind of caveat. And so it forced this idea that natural equals safe. And I'm not saying that naturals are not safe. I'm saying there are more parameters that should be included in the conversation. And hot topic, I know this one has to come up because it comes up for us on a daily basis, is allergens.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So how do we respond to all of this? Education.
Sure.
We are big believers in leading with facts and science and education and explaining to people, you know, there is more than necessarily what is listed on the front marketing label, right? Like, just, this is the information. We have done a lot of work behind it. There are more materials. This is how you can look at each material and what it means. But the hot topic that has come up significantly, I think, for everybody in the last couple of years is allergens. And I am blown away by the amount of people who don't realize that the allergens are in the natural products.
Spoiler alert.
I'm constantly just blown away. And so what we're constantly doing to people is saying that, like, for us, how we talk about fragrance is it's a spectrum, right? So you have naturals, you have safe synthetic ingredients, and there is a spectrum of how you can create something. And that will relate to the cost you're trying to target, whether you feel strongly about certain retailers, certain third-party certifications, what you're trying to meet for many of those, if you want those allergens listed, right, there's so many pieces that come into play, and how the current development process looks is those are actually not really considered. And even if they are voiced by a brand, there's no validation other than a piece of paper that you get from a fragrance house, and you cross your fingers to hope that you trust them.
Yeah. Yep. That's
right?
true.
And I think that idea that, like, what I'm constantly saying to people is like, you can't sit there and say, oh, but our fragrances are natural.
Yeah.
And that means some sort of blanket statement about safety. That's not what it is. And our position was really like, how do you build something better that explains to people that there are so many other options of how you do it? And how do you validate the safety? And for us, the first answer was transparency, right?
Yeah.
List the ingredients, show people the data, show them the proof points, and then
allow them to make a decision. Yeah.
A lot more comfortable. And I would say a high proportion of the brands that we work with have become much more open-minded.
Sure. Yeah.
To all of that, because they trust that they can see the information in front of them. It's been validated. The reason I don't use clean is it has no definition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So if I can give you validation and say to you, okay, your line in the sand is here, or I can say to you, like, this is a reprotoxin, you can do with that what you want.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Most people want, you're laughing, but
you're like, irresponsibility is pushed onto you.
Right? That's the point, is like, and maybe that's why the industry is what it is. So
like blissfully unaware, right? Like, oh, well, what I don't know, I can't, therefore be held accountable for. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where it becomes a little bit different from the rest of the space, is just the structure of the supply chain, right? And so our approach really was like, lead with science and transparency and validate everything and show people data and proof points and studies and have an open conversation. Not that you should be shocked, but pretty much 100% of customers are nodding their heads and going, great, this is great. Like, this makes it so much easier for us to make claims, to
make decisions,
all of it, right?
Yeah.
To move forward. All of our formulations happen a lot faster because they can be doing so many things in parallel because they have this information up front.
Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you have dealt with active instability. If you have ever opened a jar of retinol cream and smelt an off odor, or noticed your formula went dark brown, chances are you are dealing with active instability. It's never fun when the formula you've been working on goes south and the due date is only days away. That's why we've encapsulated the trickier ingredients to work with so you can kick the stability struggle to the curb. From retinol to vitamin C, we make it easier to work with those ingredients that typically give you that 3 p.m. headache. The cellulose shell shields the active from outside exposure. Things like air and light that are likely to cause active breakdown, giving you the power to create stable and effective formulas without the trial and error. Ready to quickly create effective skincare formulas? Discover Tagra's Cellucapse line by going to tagra.com/cellucapse. So, have you encapsulated yet? Now back to the show.
And I, when I said earlier, like, my default is fragrance free, not in the products I use. My default for creating products used to be fragrance free because of this complexity, right? Because there was not a resource available for me to advocate, to understand. And so, I had always told brands that, I can't really do any fragrance development because I don't want to be responsible. Like, I don't have access to information. I can't be informed about this decision. And that was my default.
That also shows what the process looks like. So I constantly give huge credit to Annie at Credo for trying to push transparency in fragrance in, 2019.
Yeah.
And I've had numerous conversations, and how I assess it is really great to push a standard of safety. It is useless if there aren't people that are going to support the actual fulfillment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So although totally respected from a mission,
Sure. Yeah.
If you say to all of your brands, you have to meet this levels, and they go back to the fragrance houses and they're all like, no.
Yeah.
What happens? Nothing changes. Right. And so that was really like a huge piece of our early learnings was like, there's no one who's doing it. There's no one who's helping build the better infrastructure. And that was really our thesis at that point, was like, build the infrastructure that's needed.
Yeah. And when we think about fragrance safety assessment, how does it, what are the areas that it differs the greatest when you're talking about the assessment of fragrance versus the safety assessment of an ingredient, like a topical cosmetic ingredient?
Technically, there is no, IFRA is the body. So if you talk to if you were to go build it, what the brands want to hear you say is it's IFRA compliant.
Yeah.
IFRA is a self-regulated body. It is made up of the C-suite of
the fragrance house supplier.
I don't know if I'm just stating the obvious, right? But most people just don't understand the supply chain. So they don't understand that piece, right? If it was said more clearly and explained, then people step away and they go, oh, well, yeah, that doesn't make sense that those are the people making the decision of whether this raw material should be used or at what threshold, right? There is a conflict of interest, clearly.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
And
yes.
so for us, we hold a very different standard. So I always say, like, IFRA's the floor.
Yeah.
And there are many other parameters. Our library of materials is significantly less. We have had the luxury of also partnering with really innovative people who are trying to do better things that meet that same standard of safety. There is no real line in the sand. I consider IFRA a low level line in the sand, right? For me, and it's probably why you went to saying the same thing of like using unfragranced products, is I would like, there are, as I said before, there are known endocrine disruptors, there are reprotoxins, there are carcinogens that are still on the list, right? So for many brands, proactive brands today, you say, we want to meet EU standards.
Yeah.
That's like an easy way for them to have a higher threshold.
Sure.
And completely reasonable. I think that over the course of the next couple of years, I think there will be more visibility, which will force more regulation, which will force all of these things to change and become more stringent and more testing and more data. And the more data, the better.
Yeah.
Right?
And we are talking about, evaluating fragrance in a vacuum, but how important is it to look at fragrance holistically in the product form, right? There could be things in the product that might deliver a fragrance allergen, like increase its permeation, let's say. And so how do you approach that kind of safety when, the fragrance may be one element, but how then the safety profile changes within different formats?
So one, our thesis is in general partnership. So we work directly with, whether it's the chemist, whether it's the lab, we work with somebody directly and help them however we can. And the more we can share, the better we can build those answers, right? To meet a certain standard. We don't necessarily think that like it's our responsibility to evaluate the end product. That's your piece of the puzzle, right? And we're not the same level. Our whole goal with our approach is to share as early as possible, as much information as possible, so that you are not going through a million iterations. This whole idea that it should take a million iterations to get to what you want, I think it's so interesting, because if you shared more, partnered more with the people doing the work, it shouldn't take you 1,000 iterations. You should be able to get there faster. And so our thesis on safety front, on all of those pieces, is really to like build in as a partner. And how do we do that as fast as possible? And a lot of that is sharing information.
Yeah, instead of retroactively being like, here's a product, design a fragrance to drop into it.
So what I think is really interesting that people don't understand, and I'm constantly explaining it, is imagine in your position, imagine you're the chemist making this shampoo. You've spent months and I don't know how much money trying to make this amazing shampoo. And you get to the point where like, okay, we have to make a fragrance because obviously hair products and they all need to be scented because it's a huge piece of the customer experience. And so you go to a fragrance house and they send you over oil because like that's all you really get at the beginning. And you go to put it in and the product isn't compatible. So like it browns, it whatever. It's not stable, right? And so what do? Now you have to solve an algebra problem. You're solving for X and you have no idea what any of those 100 ingredients are. And so what we realized really quickly is, yes, we think that that safety and validation and science are really important, but also how painful and what a waste of money is that for the chemist to sit there and one, make the product worse. So either use less fragrance because they're right. That is the go-to answer for all of it. And again, I say that's a Band-Aid, right? That's a Band-Aid. That's not a solution. Fix the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Come back, work together and say, well, I can tell you, we know that this material, right?
Oxidizes like highly in aqueous solutions.
The vanillin is turning it brown. Why don't
exactly like add an antioxidant? Yeah. Those kind of things that,
and it blew us away within the first 6 months, how inefficient that process is inside labs, inside contract manufacturers, and that their answer was either to remove fragrance, to lower the load. And in the end, are you making the best product? No.
I will say something else that's been starting to occur in like a recent experience that I had was I had to send bulk to the fragrance house so that they could put it in and make a decision, right? They didn't even allow me to see the fragrance to say like, oh, it's compatible or not, right? Like I developed this product and then I had to send them bulk so that they could design it and then give me the bulk back.
I will say the other side of that.
Yeah.
The other side of that we also talk about a lot, usually with founders, is we like your unscented base because it's not all the same.
Yeah.
So it's not totally fair. And depending on the brand and materials and everything, some things have a natural smell, but your definition is of unscented may have a starting point of something. And if you have to counteract what that is. So from that perspective, I'm not opposed to it yet. From the perspective of like, you might want to be participant in the process or it make validation, right? Same thing. Transparency, validation. You're like, great. I tend to be the person who's like, we'll do it and you can do it if they have someone in house, right? And I'm like, and then let's meet back in the middle and have a conversation about it. If you think that two people are trying to solve the same problem and trying to get to the same endpoint, aren't you going to get there faster and spend less
exactly
and be more efficient?
Yeah. Like I've spent a lot of time on this formula. I'm very intimate with its ingredients. And, if you're disclosing something, from your end that I immediately can identify as not working out, then we can each save each other time.
That's where I think is very interesting from a business perspective is like, that is not the thesis of any of the fragrance houses, right? They don't actually care about any of that. And to me, we've been on the inside. We understand how painful it can be. And usually, unfortunately, fragrance is the last thing that's added. And so you're usually already on a timeline, right? And if you don't have a partner, then you are forced into whatever is the fastest option. And to me, maybe I have high standards, but I don't think that that should be how products are being developed today. I think you should be able to make what you're trying to make. Right? And if everybody's on the same page, two brains are better than one.
Yeah.
And we
depends on the brain, but yeah, I agree.
We live deep in our specific space. And I constantly say, like, yes, it's great when somebody lives deep in that, like, right? Like, I don't expect consumers or brands to know the nuance of exactly what we do, but I want them to trust us. And I want to know that when they have a question, we are going to answer it. And we're not just going to answer it. We're going to show them why.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'd love to touch on allergens a little bit. So, a long time ago, I went on this deep dive for, allergens and how they were identified and, kind of that subset of the population that, are at risk that they really cover. And I think of an example of like peanut, right? Like peanuts and allergen that is disclosed on foods, but not everyone's allergic to peanuts, right? And so when we think about allergens, very similarly, and I think that specifically when it comes to fragrance allergens, people have immediately made this association as fragrance allergens equal bad, right? Just saying like, oh, it's got an allergen, I think, to, an uneducated consumer. And so, how do you think about allergens and also this increasing list of allergens that the EU is proposing?
Okay. So first of all, I think that this goes back to the lack of education.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's twofold. So one, yes, I'm in the same camp as you. I think a lot of this is like self-diagnosed, right? This whole tick of sensitive skin. And I'm not saying that people who say they don't, like, if you have sensitive skin and you think you have sensitive skin, then yes, buy the products that's for sensitive skin. I think that definitely trended upwards really quickly. There was some crazy data point we just saw. It was like up in searches 432%.
Yeah. So I went to a conference where a gentleman, he was from a German company. They actually did a pretty aggressive evaluation on like the psychological nature of sensitive skin, and we're trying to use tools to better identify those that were truly sensitive. And a high degree of individuals that perceive themselves as having sensitive skin, it is documented, it's factual, do not have what is clinically diagnosed as sensitive skin.
So where I think the problem is a lot of this education.
Yeah.
I think that, and part of that education is exactly that topic too, right? It's educating people on like, what does it really mean? And I think the challenge is that it's hard to tell people what they are or aren't, right? And if there is no clear line or test. And I think part two is a choice from a consumer standpoint that people think about. If there is an option that doesn't have the thing that somehow people have made gray with fear, then I choose that. So I think about my daughter's celiac. She is completely gluten-free. And then the amount of people who are, I like to
gluten sensitive.
No,
don't get me.
I'm so different. I'm so much more modern than you. I call it gluten-free by choice.
Oh, that's a good one. That's actually,
I'm very modern. I'm like, I get it. You're just like, oh, it's not good for people.
Sure. Yeah.
It maybe like, do we need it at all? Oh, if there's options that exist without it, I should take those. And I think in this situation, it's not the same. And I think that having listed allergens, like, it would not stop me from buying a product. I don't think there should be fear around it. What I do think the problem is, again, in fragrance, is about disclosure. So I think the problem is, and this is something for me that bothered me from the beginning, is there are people who will say things like, I'm allergic to citrus.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, great. That's like so many things. Like, you have no idea what that means. Right?
Yeah.
And the problem is when you don't disclose anything,
then they just blanketly have to not use anything that might
kind of using anything. They can't actually connect. Like, what I always thought was interesting was like the marketing verbiage that is used about what a fragrance is does not correlate to anything. Right? Like, there's no like line between I call it this and it's that, right? There is no information. It's a black box. So the consumer actually doesn't know what anything smells like also.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. That's true. Yeah. I recently went, this is a fun conversation. So I work in the pet wellness space. And so I broke down the notes that, make cat urine and cat feces smell as it will. And I gave the notes, and people were very confused that like some of them were like
something,
leafy green with soft, whatever. And they were like, what do you mean? What comes out of my cat's butt is, like yes, it's a combination of notes.
Yeah. But like, that is right. That's also the idea of like a mixture. Right. And the nuance to something, you may not no, what I always thought was interesting is the amount of money and effort that is put into putting those descriptions together, but they're not based on anything. So the challenge for consumers is like what you're saying about a peanut is you can read the ingredient list. Well, you can't do that here. So this whole fear around allergens increased because you actually don't know, other than those labeled allergens, you don't know what else is in there. So if it's not on that list and you happen to have a sensitivity to something else, well, good luck.
Yeah.
Right? There is no solution. And if there was a push towards transparency and more information, and if there was ever a time, it should be now, right? Where it's all digestible and you can analyze data and you can look at these things if people took a more collaborative approach to solving this, then all of those people who do have sensitivities could much better target products that were appropriate. And I do completely agree with you to align it to food, because I think that should be where we're going.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're coming up on time, but there is something that I've always wanted to ask someone in the fragrance space that I'm going to ask. So, it's kind of like I compare it to, like getting glasses, right? I think I operated for a long time being like, I have perfect vision, blah, blah, blah. Went to the eye doctor, don't have perfect vision, got glasses, wear contacts, can never go back to not doing it.
The world is clear.
The world is different. Obviously it is for you when you went on the deep dive, but I'm curious also about like smell. Like, can you go out in public and
it did get better?
Okay. Like, I feel like I would be so critical of like every smell, like knowing like that top note, this note, like all of these information inbound.
And it's not like I'm a perfumer. I am not the perfumer, It is amazing. I am significantly more aware.
Yeah.
I may also make commentary.
But it's a slippery slope to crotchety old woman. You know this, right?
I'm also the person who's like, everything is subjective, right? So something like that is, if you like go on a deep dive on that side, on like olfactive side, it's like smells connected to your limbic system. It's directly connected to certain experiences and memories. And if you loved your grandmother so much and she smelled like crotchety old lady, like that's I love it.
Come on. Yeah.
Everybody has their own. She really smells like this like dusty rose.
Yeah.
That's your thing. You love it. Like, so I don't like to discriminate about notes. And when we see briefs, I'm like, open. It's all open, but I am much more aware and sensitive to what people are wearing, knowing what it is right away, which always like blew me away. I was like, wow. And where we've gone to now is much more about like raw materials. Like we can almost spot raw materials in samples. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah. Well, this was a great conversation. I'm so happy that we were able to have it. And I really appreciate the resource that you and Lucent Labs are proving to be in terms of really trying to push the lever towards more transparency for consumer safety and really just choice, right? So thank you for your time.
I appreciate talking about all science dorky things. You know that. Especially when I get to talk about fragrance topics. But honestly, like, this is what we live and breathe every day. I feel like the industry itself is very veiled and there aren't a lot of open conversations. And I think, like anything else, the more conversations, the more it is demystified.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Right? It's true. It's amongst all of it. Like, the more you talk about it, the more opinion. I don't think people's like opinions are good. We should be talking about things. We should all be pushing the boulder up the hill together, because the standard of safety is too low. The lack of transparency is absurd in today's world. And the majority of products and developers and founders that I meet want to have that validation and they cannot get it. So if we can be a small part of pushing that boulder up the hill, I will do it.
Awesome. I think demand better, do better, right?
Yes. Yes. Somebody has to speak up at some
Yeah.
point, right?
That's gonna be on my merch page, t-shirts, hats, koozies. So
What is somebody has to speak up?
either that or my do better, demand better.
Right. So, and what you just said is like, it's not fair to demand better if somebody isn't doing better. So it's a cat and mouse of which order that happens. And I'm a firm believer that there is not no point, but there's kind of no point to demand better if nobody can do better. Right. Or maybe the other way, then you find people who can. I don't know. So you're right. Like maybe Credo demanding better somehow subconsciously forced me to create that. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know. But yes, we need more people who want to participate in all of these conversations and help shift.
Yeah, for sure. Well, lovely. Thank you again.
Always. Anytime. We can do a whole panel with a bunch of people talking all things fragrance and
for sure
and everything. But
Great.
really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome.